Well, welcome back to the Girlfriend Doctor Show. I am your host, Dr. Anna Cabeca. I am a triple board certified expert in women's health, gynecology, obstetrics, integrative medicine, anti-aging, and longevity medicine. And I am here to help you optimize your hormones and your longevity. One of the things that has come up a lot over the past several years is use of GLP-1s. GLP-1s, the form of peptide that has been very popularized in the weight loss industry, and it is an area of controversy. So today I want to draw some clarity around the issue of using GLP-1s, when, what's safe, what are the different forms, what can you stack it with, or where do you have to be cautious of? So you have been asking me these questions for a while. So I'm bringing on an amazing guest, Dr. Tyna Moore. Dr. Tyna Moore is an amazing woman who has been working in this space for quite a while. She is an expert in holistic and regenerative medicine and resilient metabolic health. She's licensed as a naturopathic physician and a chiropractor and draws on knowledge from both traditional and alternative fields of science and medicine to provide a comprehensive perspective to individuals striving to enhance their health and well-being. Dr. Tyna holds degrees from the the National College of Natural Medicine and also the University of Western States Chiropractic College. She doesn't just focus on symptoms. She focuses on the root cause. And one of the reasons through her own journey, she became an expert in using peptides, including semaglutide and Ozempic, as a longevity tool for healing. So, one of the things that she says is everyone's different. And she has talked about microdosing these hormonal therapies for individuals for metabolic health. A little bit goes a long way. So, I look forward to introducing her to you today on the Girlfriend Doctor Show. Join me in welcoming Dr. Tyna Moore. Welcome, Dr. Tyna, to the Girlfriend Doctor Show. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk with you and get to chat with you again.
I know, but I would have to say the environment in which we connected last time, which was poolside in Orlando. Where were we? Orlando
Yeah,
poolside. I mean, that was a very nice environment to catch up on.
that was fun. I know. I know. And your little granddaughter was so cute. That was a fun day.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. It's just good for the soul, good for the soul. Sun and love. Like I always say, the
Yeah.
power of oxytocin, right? The power of oxytocin. Well,
Amen.
I've been excited to talk to you because, of course, I've been talking about you and learning from you and hearing all the amazing things you're doing. And we're going to talk a little bit about the still very controversial use of GLP-1s and how that's come. I want you to give us a little history and background of how you came to really become an expert in this area of using and actually microdosing GLP-1s and why.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. It all started with my podcast. I was getting hounded by my podcast producer to do a episode on Ozempic. He was like, do an Ozempic, weight loss, Ozempic. And I hate talking about weight loss. It's just really not my jam. My whole message for as long as I've been online for over a decade has been, focus on getting strong. Don't worry
Right.
about the weight. Focus on muscle, focus on strength. And
Get healthy, right? Focus on
yeah,
health.
get your metabolic health in order. Really, the whole foundation of everything I speak from is about metabolic health, and with muscle being a huge part of that. And so I started researching this peptide, thinking it was a drug, thinking it was something that was potentially not great. Actually, I was telling my followers like, "Well, we'll wait and see." I got into it, realized this is a peptide. It just happens to be dispensed by the pharmaceutical industry. It has been in some form or another, a generation of this peptide has been around for 20 years
Right.
in use in type 2 diabetics, only more recently FDA approved for weight loss, and really good safety profile. And then I started looking at its history and how it worked throughout the body. And I found a litany of papers that were so compelling and interesting that I don't know why aren't making headlines, but they should, from tip to toe. Impacts on neuroregeneration, quelling neuroinflammation, impacts on pain, impacts on our joints, muscles, soft tissues, impacts on our various different organ systems, really positive impacts across the board. And so I started talking about it and it caught on. And my argument really from the beginning was, okay, we're looking at these severe pathologies of weight loss, of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And as you know, and maybe your audience knows this as well, but when you get to type 2 diabetes, there's been damage being done to your metabolic and your mitochondrial health for decades. Usually it's, if
Decades,
you
right?
know, it's like, it's a long journey to that number, that magic number of like, oh, welcome, you've arrived to type 2 diabetes. That you're in a devastated metabolic state by that point. And we've just normalized it as a society because it's so common. And I was looking at that thinking, okay, well, they're using these, you know, potentially very high doses in these folks, and a lot of people are reporting side effects. And the mainstream media, the functional medicine community, everybody just sort of was like preaching the same tune, which I thought was odd that those two were lining up. When does our community
Functional
ever
medicine, yeah, no.
and mainstream media ever say the same thing, right? And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. So that really made me, sounded a bit like propaganda, what I was seeing in the headlines a couple summers ago. And I was like, I'm going to really dig in here. So my thought process was, what if I approach this like I do the way that I've been doing bioidentical hormone replacement for decades? I never stopped with the Women's Health Initiative study 20 some years ago, right? Like docs like you and I
Same.
have been doing it. So and as you well know, there are people of various ages and backgrounds and they come to us with different health histories and they need different hormonal interventions. And sometimes we need to put a 35-year-old woman on some progesterone, or sometimes we need to put a young man who's had multiple head injuries on some testosterone because he's womped his HPA axis, right? So for me, offering hormones as needed, depending on what symptom picture and labs line up to say, doesn't seem like a far stretch. And so I thought the same with this peptide. I was like, well, what if we just did a personalized dosing strategy with a GLP-1? Obviously, some of these horrible side effects are probably just an overdose issue. Like these
Hmm.
people are literally being overdosed. And so they're nauseous and vomiting and having diarrhea. Like that doesn't seem necessary. Called all my friends who were using this peptide in clinic. And while some of them were using them at lower doses and calling it microdosing, they were still using it for weight loss and or metabolic health. And my argument was like, well, have any of you tried it for this, that, and the other, all these other hosts or benefits that I'm seeing in the literature for brain and heart and, different organ systems.
Neuroinflammation, PCOS, I mean,
Yeah. Like,
Parkinson's, Alzheimer's.
and they all said no. And I said, are any of you trying it at a fraction of the starting dose in your thin, metabolically healthy patients? And they said no. And I was like, well, I'm going to try that and see what happens. And I did. And it's just been wild. It's been really incredible. I think it's finally catching on. I've been talking about this now for over a year, like year and a half, I would say. And I feel like the landscape is changing. I feel like this conversation is much more out there and people are getting less emotionally charged by it because they all want to jump to the obesity and diabetes conversation. And I'm having a different conversation over here. These are two different cohorts of patients, right? And so not to say that a low personalized dosing strategy wouldn't also be appropriate for somebody who has more weight to lose or who has more metabolic compromise. I think that what I'm trying to bring up is really a conversation about being more inclusive about the dosing strategy so that we can offer people, just like we do with I know you enjoy utilizing compound pharmacies like I do. I've been using compounding pharmacies my whole career. I didn't realize that doctors didn't use them until more recently. I've been hearing
That's
about
because you're
it.
naturopathic. Yeah.
I know. So utilizing, different forms and modalities across the board and harmonizing them as a collective. This is just one tool in a tool belt, right? Like we've got all of our tools available to us. And so that's how I got here.
No, I love it. I love it. And very rational. Like, and when I heard about your approach with really, really fractional doses and your methodology behind that, that really resonated with me and made sense. Let's talk about what GLP-1 is. Like, when we talk really in it really started in the obesity world, right? With GLP-1 and bariatric surgery, noting improvements in GLP-1. But like, what is GLP-1 and what causes it to decrease in our body?
So it's glucagon like peptide 1, and it's an endogenously created signaling peptide hormone that our body makes. So our body makes, there are other signaling peptide hormones that your audience may be more familiar with, like leptin, ghrelin, insulin. It is secreted by the L cells of the gut, and it is secreted in the brain, in different regions of the brain. And there are receptors for this peptide all throughout the body. So there must be utilization for different reasons all throughout the body. It happened in the early days of its discovery. It was actually, what I understand, it was an orphan drug. And then Novo Nordisk, a scientist there, came back and said, hey, let's look at this more intimately for type 2 diabetes. And so then it was put on the FDA approved and utilized and put on the scene that way, back with exenatide 20 years ago. From there, there's just been different generations of it coming up, and they realized along the way that there was a significant impact on weight and there was improvements in weight loss. And so they FDA approved that just a few years ago. I think like 2.5 years ago, it was FDA approved for weight loss. That's when everybody kind of went crazy about it. And that's when we really started seeing a lot of the clickbait and a lot of the sensationalism. So, make of that what you will. But as a peptide, it from what I can understand, it harmonizes with your other signaling peptide hormones as they do, right? None of these work in isolation,
That's
and
right.
we need the whole concert. So our leptin and ghrelin actually seems to work better, at least in the mice data that I've seen, works better when GLP-1 is on board and present and binding the receptor. And so that tells me that it's needed. I think that some people, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well, I think that some people are potentially experiencing a functional deficiency, just like we see with other hormones. So
Like
we'll
thyroid insufficiency or
exactly.
insulin producing insufficiency versus insulin resistance or some type of resistance.
Right.
So, what signals GLP-1 to be produced? Like
In
what
the
is
brain, I don't know in the brain. I don't think we know in the brain entirely. In fact, a lot of the papers that I've read, still these scientists still think it's made in the gut and makes its way to the brain, but that's not correct. It's actually made in the brain, and we have data to show that. In the gut, the L cells are signaled by the actual bolus, the mechanical bolus of food going through the gut, and also different molecules. So whether it's carbs, glucose, bitter sensation, or like bitter herbs, anything bitter foods, different molecules, and then also different microbiome in there. So like Akkermansia and different bugs in the gut will get the L cells to signal and secrete GLP-1. My argument is that most of our patients have leaky gut, and most patients, period, have some kind of gastrointestinal complaint, right? Whether it's dyspepsia and GERD, or the other end, they've got IBS or some kind of inflammatory thing going on. So I was thinking maybe people's L cells are pooped out. Maybe also as we age, we know that the gut lining atrophies and we lose intrinsic factor in our stomach, right? So maybe the L cells are just petering out, and we're getting this sort of functional deficiency, just like you said with the other hormones. I've seen so much of that with thyroid, for instance, and adrenal function. So that was my argument for utilizing a different dosing strategy.
In this conversation and talking about this with you, it makes me think, okay, how with our other hormones, thyroid, et cetera, there's disruption because of endocrine disruptors. And I mean, that's a really big issue. The effects of also on the gut microbiome of antibiotics and other chemicals,
Yeah.
and again, hormone disruptors. Is that affecting our ability to produce the GLP-1?
I can only guess, but I would say yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
I would say so too.
if we've got a disrupted microbiome, and we've got that's a more pathologic biome, and we've got inflammation brewing, and we've got leaky gut, which so many patients have, and you've been in this long enough, as have I, where I remember talking to a group of MDs about leaky gut back in, I don't know, 2014, and they all looked at me like I had two heads. So I think that conversation is finally become much more mainstream, thankfully. So the MDs out there can appreciate that, this is a real condition, it's a real situation. And I think the microbiome research that's been done, but I don't think anyone's really looking at it that way. I hope they will. I hope that the more we talk about this, that the right people, it'll spark interest and the right studies will be done, because I think that, and then we've got the studies showing really incredible impacts with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So definitely something going on there, which I'm sure also has very much to do with the gut microbiome. And it shifts the gut microbiome. There are studies to show that GLP-1s, when taken, start to shift the microbiome to a more favorable. So something, it's all the things, it's all the systems.
Yeah, no. And, as we're talking, I'm thinking, okay, well, one of the markers too for gut health is IGF, right? And hormone health and energy and longevity. So, wondering if there's been a relationship between IGF and GLP-1, looking at that growth hormone level. Because when I see it, one of the hormones I test, and I don't know if we can test GLP-1 levels in your body, but we can test IGF. And when they're low, there's usually a gut issue, sleep issue, immune issue, hormonal issue. But I'm
Yep.
wondering if it's the same with GLP-1, is they're able to see, like, to be able to identify that.
That's a good question. There, as of now, I don't know of any good tests that look at GLP-1 because it has such a short half-life. So it's hard to determine. I have some friends who work more in genomic medicine, and they've said that there are some, some SNPs that they can look at to see if people are going to be more prone to not, I think, producing GLP-1 effectively, but I haven't gotten great details on that. And I want to know, which I think I'm going to put you to task on at some point. I want to know the link between oxytocin and GLP-1 because I think there's something there too. And I found some papers that kind of want to whisper to it, but there's nothing. There's nothing yet that is linking things. But you know how it is. It's like you and I know things, and then 20 years later, a paper comes out on it. So
Well, you're talking my favorite language right now. But when you think, like, oxytocin is increased by gastric distension, like we're fed and happy.
yeah,
And that's true. That's oxytocin is increased. And the vagus nerve also has a relation with oxytocin. So we see that. So I wonder if it's that sense of satiety tied into the GLP-1s that with that increase oxytocin. Very interesting.
that's what I was wondering. Like a
Are you
very
finding
similar mindset.
happier? Are your patients happier?
Oh yeah, people are much happier on it. I've got a sizable following. I've had so many people message me, tell me that they've either been able to decrease or go off their antidepressants. Just the mood boosting. We do have data, conclusive data showing
Yeah.
mood boost, showing decrease in anxiety. So, and people, when I ask folks how they're doing on it, because I know they've gone, I can usually tell, honestly. I'll look at someone, I'm like, are you trying the Terzepatide? And they'll say, yeah. And I'm like, how are you doing? And they all say the same thing. They're like, I feel freaking amazing. I feel great. So there's something there that is, we know it plays on dopaminergic and serotonin pathways in the brain. So there's definitely something there. I do think that when we improve metabolism, obviously we get improvements across the board. So it's an and, we're
Hmm.
getting this
Right.
and we're getting that. I think that, oh, I don't think, I know that the mechanism of action that we're seeing with some of these other organ systems is distinct and separate from the actual weight loss or metabolic health application. There's different things going on. So we're getting a multitude of impacts. It's regenerative, it's healing, and it's anti-inflammatory across the board. For
So,
instance, you'll appreciate this. I was on 2 grains of Armour thyroid when I started on low doses of GLP-1s. I was on 2 grains. I'd gotten up to 2 grains a day, which was crazy. And I have had so many patients who got up to those levels and they become geriatric, and it's just a matter of like they start looking really hypothyroid again because we cannot keep cranking the dose up, right? I am on half a grain a day now. So the long-term use of these GLP-1s, I believe, and this is anecdotal, but I believe they are healing over time. So I believe they heal the metabolic system, and I believe they also make insulin secrete appropriately. So for those who are not just insulin resistant, but who are not good secretors, it helps with the insulin secretion appropriately and the insulin signaling reception on the other end. And I think across the board, we're going to see, so for folks who are like, well, do I have to stay on this forever? I'm kind of like, I kind of want to stay on it and keep healing because
right.
it's clearly healing systems in the body, and the pain reduction impact, the impact on autoimmune disease, like across the board, really cool impacts and data to support it.
So, I mean, that's a key area with the autoimmune disease and those effects, rheumatoid arthritis, SLE. So how are you using it? Are you using it microdose? Well, first of all, there are many different forms. There's what are most commonly semaglutide, terzepatide, and then there's retatride,
Yeah, retatrutide or retatrutide.
retatride,
I know it's like ratatouille.
ratatouille.
That one I don't think is out yet. That one is still, I believe, in phase 3, and it's coming. That one is a triple agonist. Tirzepatide is a double agonist, and semaglutide is just GLP-1 agonism. It is basically bioidentical to the GLP-1 that we make endogenously. It's just been tweaked to have a longer half-life in the body. So it lasts
Mm.
for 4 to 7 days instead of, 2 to 4 hours. Terzepatide is a dual agonist. It's got the GLP-1 agonism and it's got GIP. GIP is going to, so interestingly, GLP-1 increases insulin secretion and decreases glucagon secretion. GIP agonism increases glucagon. But I've listened to some pretty nerdy scientists who were in the development of these things. And I mean, I've gone down the rabbit hole into like Scandinavian websites and I found all kinds of stuff that I can't believe I find this information. And I'm like, this is fascinating. And I don't even know half of what they're saying because their accents are so thick. But this one, he was a key developer in Terzepatide, and he said that whether we agonize or antagonize glucagon doesn't seem to matter. We still get improved benefits in metabolic health. So I thought that was really interesting. But I have found Terzepatide it seems to decrease inflammation better across the board. But I gotta say, my patients, they have a preference. They either like their semaglutide or they like their Terzepatide, and for whatever reason, my husband, for instance, utilizes it for alcohol cessation and cardiovascular support, and he finds that Terzepatide doesn't quell his desire to drink like semaglutide does. So it's kind of across the board. If somebody's got more of an involvement with their metabolic health, I might lean on the Terzepatide more. And then retatrutide is a triple agonist that's coming down the chute. I think that's probably more applicable to those who really are in that metabolic dysfunction, type 2 diabetes land, because I know with Terzepatide, even at the tiny, tiny doses, if you utilize it in someone who's quite lean and fit, I mean, I've got women with 6-pack abs using it for, different reasons, cardiovascular, so, these ladies' blood sugar markers go wonky in menopause too, so
Right.
those gals get pretty big blood sugar drops on Terzepatide more so than on semaglutide. So we just have to be more careful and keep that dosing strategy really individualized for them.
And how do you preference? How do you choose which one for which client?
I think money plays a role because to get these doses that I'm talking about. Now, Eli Lilly has come out with Zepbound, which is a vial form, so we're able to actually mitigate the dosage. The pens, the brand name, conventional brand name pens are pre-filled and they're predetermined, so you can't really play with the dosing. So to
And how
get,
much are those? What's the expense?
I would say roughly, they change roughly about $1,000 a month for either
Wow.
semaglutide or Terzepatide. Most recently, when I looked, Terzepatide was less expensive than semaglutide, and in the past, it's been more expensive. In the compounded world, that's not the case. In the compounded world, the semaglutide is very inexpensive, and the Terzepatide is 3 to 4 times the price, give or take. Is that what you're finding when you're looking at it? It's compounded. It's roughly more expensive.
Compounded terzepatide is more expensive, but now you
Yeah.
can get it to like $60 a month, $100 a month
Yeah, if we're
with
if we're do- lo-
compounding.
if we're dosing low as well, I mean, it depends on the dose. So
Yeah.
that's one consideration. And then I look at just what are their short-term goals, what are their long-term goals, what's their gastrointestinal health like. I find with semaglutide that people tend to have firming of the stools, which for somebody like me who has that like IBS diarrhea type, it's great. With somebody who tends more towards constipation, maybe not. I found with Terzepatide actually a bit of a looser stool phenomenon. So it really just depends. And then if we're looking at someone who has autoimmune disease and or they definitely are falling into that insulin resistance, even just like someone like me, I'm fit, I'm lean, but menopause is coming. I'm walking right head on into it. And I found myself with like 15, 20 pounds, just boom, right around my midsection, just came out of nowhere. There it was. Despite best efforts, the harder I tried, the more I cranked my cortisol, the more it came on. It's like that
Mhm.
vicious
Yeah.
cycle. I think Terzepatide is really nice in those cases. Some say that Terzepatide is better tolerated as far as nausea and vomiting go. I have not found that. And I've actually found that some people tend more towards dyspepsia with Terzepatide. They'll complain more of burping and, kind of that bloating sensation higher up around the esophagus. So kind of just depends.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about dosing and microdosing, when you say microdosing, what do you mean? Because people will say, hey, yeah, I'm microdosing this. And they're on, just the starting dose of the medication, which isn't a microdose at all. So,
Right. That I think the inmates are running the asylum on this one. So, to be fair, there are other people who have claimed to be microdosing, and I'm not saying I'm the only one, but when I talked to them, they were using it in low doses for weight loss and diabetes. And they would start at the standard starting dose and they might bring them up to the next dose. The standard dosing protocol is you start them and you essentially double the dose every 4 weeks until you get them up to almost 10 times the dose you started them at least with semaglutide is that's the case. So their version of microdosing was standard starting dose, bring them up one tier. That is not at all what I was talking about. I was talking about a fraction of the standard starting dose. And this is not a weight loss. This is not a weight loss plan. This is not something that will definitely induce weight loss. And a lot of people have misunderstood me and gotten frustrated and come back and said, well, I'm not losing any weight. I never said it was a weight loss strategy. It can induce weight loss in someone like me or you who are doing all the things. We have our bioidentical hormone replacement on board. We have our muscle mass. We have all that. And
Well,
now
and
we're just,
addressing toxicity, 'cause you're a naturopathic physician, so
yeah,
gut health, your
yeah,
metabolic health, I mean, it's a very
yeah.
holistic approach.
All the things. Then we throw a little Terzepatide in the mix and that fluff comes off. That 10, 15 pounds comes off, no problem. But if somebody's really looking at a weight loss strategy, they probably are looking at more of a standard starting dose. That said, they can very often stay at those lower doses or they can go very slowly. So I just want to make sure that's clear for people. With my strategy over here, utilizing it for more of a longevity wellness optimization for a litany of conditions, I'm talking a fraction of the starting dose. So maybe it's a fifth. It might be a tenth. It depends on the person sitting in front of me, what their short-term goals are, what their long-term goals are, how they respond. I'll throw in a third problem I'm seeing. I'm seeing doctors hear me say that part, a fifth to a tenth of the starting dose, and then they keep their patient there, but these patients clearly have weight loss that they need to have happen, and they're not losing any weight. So I'll see these people. I know they're on a, quote unquote microdose, and I'll say, well, I haven't seen you for 3 months. I know you've been on it. You don't look like you've lost any weight. How's that going? And they're like, I haven't lost any weight. And but my doctor won't up the dose. And I'm like, but they need a more of a weight loss strategy, right? So the dose really varies upon, that's why I say short-term and long-term goals. Because initially short-term, I do think most people want some weight loss, but long-term, that's not necessarily, I had just a few pounds to lose. I was really going for the neural benefits, uh, the mood boosting, the pain reduction, the autoimmune piece was more my bag for personally for me. And I ended up getting a bit too thin too fast. And I was like, whoa, we got to back this up. And I told you offline, I actually put a little bit of weight on purpose. So just to keep the wrinkles down. so, it's all over the board, but I think that a lot of med spas are now saying they're microdosing, and some people are calling just splitting the regular dose up into different doses, separate doses throughout the week is microdosing. It's all over the board. I'll just say this. I am now reframing that word to personalized dosing strategy because I think that we're just meeting the patient where they're at for the needs that they have individually and based on their health history, their age, their gender, their weight, their size, their, muscle mass, all of those things need to be their toxicity load, their all of it. It all needs to be taken into consideration when you come up with the dosing. I don't think the med spas are the place to access this. I think some of the online places are doing a better job. And I do know that the doctors are starting to catch on and hear this. And I hope that more because we still can go the traditional route if people want the brand name and they're concerned about I know a lot of doctors are, and I don't know, I'd love to hear what you tell doctors, but I get a lot of doctors saying, we don't trust compounding pharmacies. Are you concerned
Yeah,
about
no, yeah.
quality and purity? And so for them, we have Zepbound in the vial form. If you want to, I think it's a more inclusive dosing, actually, at the end of the day, like meeting the patient where they're at. There's no reason why somebody needs to be put on the standard starting dose. It's potentially too high for them and they spend weeks vomiting and having diarrhea. Like that is unnecessary. That's overdosing.
Right, and that's not a way to improve quality of life. And again, focusing on the underlying reasons that's causing the metabolic dysfunction to begin with. There's so
Yes.
many, right? There's so many, especially in today's day and time. Well, I asked my audience, my Girlfriend Doctor Club community, which is my membership community, what questions they have for you. They couldn't wait. They were like, okay, let's give this form. One of the thing is, what about when, the issue of people gaining weight once they stop? So should there be a long-term maintenance strategy?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the individual and how they came into it. For me, I am using it more for autoimmune mitigation than I am for weight. And so, and I'm seeing that that's the case with many of my patients as well. So we're probably going to do it more of a cycling strategy where we come on and off just like we would any other peptide, right? We don't stay on them forever. We want to keep the receptor sensitive. So coming on and off, and that's going to look completely different for everybody, just as I'm sure it is for you and your hormonal patients. There's not a good standard there across the board. And I think that we can rotate them. I've utilized that as well, bringing in semaglutide and then Terzepatide just to change it up a little bit and seeing how they do with that. If people implement, and the data is showing this too, if people implement the lifestyle changes, because it does cause neuroplasticity to occur in the brain, and there's a really remarkable impact on the brain. And I think that that is a window of opportunity for people to hardwire in these new lifestyle habits and change the way that they're going about doing things. So I believe if people take that opportunity seriously and rewire their brains, bring in the exercise habits, bring in the, obviously focusing the macros on protein heavy so that we get enough so that we don't lose any muscle mass, and doing all the things that you and I teach our patients and our followers, then looking at titrating down instead of just dropping off the cliff, like just instead of just discontinuing, we titrate down the dose, we see how they do. People are able to maintain pretty well. And even the studies are showing that. I do think, though, for some people, obesity really is a disease in some cases. And in that cohort, we're talking a whole different story. That's a different strategy altogether. And I think those people are probably looking at utilizing this peptide. That said, doing everything in your power to keep the dose as low as possible so it continues to work for the longest time that we can, because there is a way to get yourself to the point where you're resistant to it. And I'm talking to compounding pharmacists who patients are calling in saying, can I go up to 3 milligrams now? Can I, like, they're going over what the data has shown to be safe. I think in that case, doing everything we can to bring in the other tools in the tool belt and the lifestyle pieces to keep that dose super low.
Yeah. And again, the hormone disruptors and the toxins and healing the gut and all of
Yes.
that's
Yes.
powerful. So, what are some natural things we can do? Like, what are ways that we can naturally increase our GLP-1? And then one of our ladies wrote in, is there GLP-1s in pill form? Because,
There are,
BPC 157 was only an injectable peptide, and then it became an oral peptide for
yeah.
gut health. Speaking of gut health.
I like it better in the oral form for gut health, the BPC 157.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great. So yes, there are a ton coming down the chute. There is an oral form. There is some, sorry, I'm stumbling over my
Semaglutide
words.
oral.
There's sublingual semaglutide and Terzepatide from some of these compounding pharmacies. I haven't utilized those. I am a needle girl. My background's regenerative injections. So anytime I can get a needle in someone, I know that I'm controlling dosage better and I'm controlling absorption better. So I am a big fan of the injections. It's just such a tiny needle. It's not a big deal. Everybody gets over it. There are so many cool versions coming down the chute. I saw an article the other day. There's, of course, every big pharma company is trying to get their hands on this because this is a world changer. So they've all got a different version coming. And I think that soon we're going to find much more affordable oral forms in the very near future. So look out for that. And then natural ways to increase it. Again, gut health, like you keep saying, like we have to heal the gut if we want the L cells to work. And then there are different nutrients, leafy greens. High spinach has been shown in the data to actually help with GLP-1 secretion, but I'm just not a big fan of high raw cruciferous vegetables. I think they're goitrogens, so not so sure about that. There's different supplements that have come out making promises. Again, I'm not so sure that those are long-term solutions. Bitter foods I know are going to be helpful. Gosh, I'm thinking of herbs like berberine, but that's more for the bitter characteristics of it. None of these are nature's Ozempic, though. There's no nature's Ozempic. We can take sodium butyrate as a supplement. That's going to be helpful, but also we could just improve our gut health as much as we can by making good food choices so that we have a favorable microbiome so that that biome that's there actually helps with the sodium butyrate production. So we make the GLP-1 out of the L cells, right? So, I mean,
Right, right.
I'm stumbling over this thought process, but you get what I'm laying down
Yeah,
is
no, and I love the way you're thinking about it. I mean, because it's this development and it's new in that way and looking at the long-term use too. Now that's another question. If you're on it long term and you stopped, have you, like, because someone becomes resistant or whatever it is, then their body are they still making GLP-1s or have we suppressed? I worry about that with hormones all the time, like high
Right.
dose testosterone. We know it suppresses endogenous testosterone. So then when you stop, it can be a while or never to your body to produce it again. So I mean, there's those things
I
to
don't think
be
I
concerned
don't
about.
think there's a feedback mechanism on this though. I don't think there's
Okay.
a mechanism with the pituitary. I'm not sure, but I think of these more in the category like I look at leptin. Leptin's going to be secreted by your fat cells to go to your brain to tell, well, it does a lot of things that we don't even know about, but the main one that we understand is leptin's going to go to the brain and tell the brain that you're full. And when you lose weight, you lose fat cells, so you lose leptin secretion, right? That's the big conundrum with weight loss and why it's so. I always say, like, the losing weight part's actually, unfortunately, the easier of the two parts. It's the maintaining the weight
Maintain.
loss.
You're
It's
absolutely right.
much, much harder because literally your body is fighting against you in a myriad of ways in that case. And so that's a real pickle. And this is where I think GLP-1s are an incredible tool and maybe necessary long term to keep. I don't think about going off GLP-1s. Just like when I put someone on thyroid, I don't think about going off thyroid and I don't think of going off HRT. And I get that question a lot because I think people think they want to use it short term and go off. And if you just have a few pounds to lose and you're metabolically pretty sound, I could see how that's a reality. Or if you're using it maybe just to sort of dial in a few things. But for someone like me with this chronic autoimmune situation, this is something I plan to use and cycle for as long as I can get my hands on it. And same with my hormone. I mean, you're not getting my hormones out of me. So I joke that if the grid goes down, I'm going to have to start sacrificing the forest animals to get their glands because I'm going to
Back
get
to
my
nose to
I'm
tail.
getting my hormones.
Yeah.
But I think for those who are really struggling with obesity, this is probably, yeah. I mean, I don't think this is something you're going to go on, lose the weight, and then get off. Just being honest.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think that's it, considering what we're using it for, right? What caused the
Yes.
obesity to begin with. And, the overeating, that's, like we've talked about for a long time, it's not for lose weight, it's not less calories, more exercise. So we got to
Right.
figure out what's causing it. And
Right.
I think that's so fascinating with GLP-1s, especially in in modern day, as we're looking more into peptides and working with and as a hormone specialist, working with hormones, like I don't use your age as a limiting effect. I would never stop your thyroid hormone after, you know, menopause because
Right.
ridiculous when they say, oh, we're going to stop your estrogen now after menopause because whatever, you're out of the estrogen window. I mean, ridiculous stuff. So
Yeah.
like we have to change that philosophy around hormones and peptides. And yet when we are replenishing, I like to say I replenish hormones. I do hormone replenishment.
I like that word.
Right. It's so much better because I never want to replace what your body's making, but I want to cautiously support your body's not, cautiously replenish and support your body's natural production as long as we can.
Right. We want to do both.
Right.
Right.
Want to do
So
both.
we eat the right foods, we live the right lifestyle so that we optimize what our body can naturally do. But we're all, I always look at it this way, Anna. When a patient walks in the door, I'm so interested how they got here. What's the
Mm-hmm.
backstory, right? So I was, I was exposed to so many toxic chemicals growing up as a child. I was living in Northern California where they were spraying us with malathion to kill the fruit flies when I was a kid. It was insane. My mom's a hairstylist. She's had 30 years in a soup of toxicity
Right.
up to her elbows, literally. And so, how does somebody come to me? And what's that backstory? What are their adverse childhood events? It's we can't always fix everything with great. It's insane. And one of the things I like about you is that you use all the tools available to you, and you're not afraid of it. Because this puritanical version that people have on the internet, where it's like, well, just go carnivore and all your woes will be cured. It's not that simple. We all walked in the door with a long litany of history, and sometimes people's guts are just trashed, and they
That's
come
right.
in. They're just a mess, and we're just going to get them a couple levels up from trashed, best we can do. So I'm here to just pull out whatever tools I need. And so when people say, well, how long and this and that, I'm like, how'd you come to me? How'd you come in the door? What are we doing here? What's short term? What's long term? Because if some people need a little something, something for a long, long time, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. No, and I think paying attention to that, like for example, I saw someone yesterday who had been diagnosed with breast cancer the year prior. And I always ask, well, how did you get the breast cancer? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, well, we have to figure that out because number one risk of breast cancer is history of breast cancer. So we want to create bodies inhospitable to cancer. So you got to figure it out. What was your vitamin D level? What was your, like, and you go through the timeline of their life and exposures, et cetera, to try to figure out why. And then that is so empowering. It is
Yes.
so empowering when you understand, okay, why, what's going on? What's
Yes.
the genetic piece? What's the epigenetic piece? What's the hormonal talk? I was looking, oh my gosh, talk about Tina, we're going to talk all day, but I'm going to get ready to let you go. But I'm just thinking, I had a lovely patient yesterday that I was looking at her labs. I had done a total tox burden on her, total tox test by Vibrant Labs. And it was like, everything was high. All the parabens, environmental toxins, BCPs,
Wow.
BPAs, they were all very high. Those are all hormone disruptors, right? Those are all
Yes.
hormone disruptors. And you can say, okay, well, this is why you got your cancer. Let's get rid of it safely. And you got to get rid of these things safely too. But also it's why your hormones not feeling, you don't feel good. You have no energy. You're tired. Your thyroid's not working. So I want our audience to really understand that's what we're saying too. It's not a miracle drug in and of itself, right? It's in the
No.
context of how we're taking care of our patients and how getting to the underlying issues and addressing the individualized, personalized, let's say Dr. Tina Moore method. you gotta you gotta say that, Tina,
Well,
because
no, it's true. It's not a substitute for anything, and it's certainly not a miracle panacea. It's just a tool in the tool belt. I
yeah,
think it's a really powerful lever puller because it does so many things inside the body. So we're getting like a multi-pronged approach with one thing that we can do potentially very low and safely, and then I think very affordably, depending on how we access it. So that's where I got excited about it, and it doesn't dismiss the work. We have to still do the
right.
work, and sometimes
Sadly.
we need to do something even more so, like you just shared with that tox burden. Like there's always layers of the onion to unravel, and this is just a really nice tool in the tool belt. And if anything, I want clinicians listening and the general public listening to not fear it. The
Yeah.
fear, I think, is around the heavy duty dosing strategies that we've been seeing. But I do think that that's shifting even in the allopathic community now more so. So I'm hopeful that people will realize that we can do a more personalized approach and have a bigger breadth of impact with these peptides.
Right. And then to just draw a parallel is the fear of hormone replacement that really has hurt so many
Yes.
women was the oral estrogens and progestins, synthetic
Yep.
progestins. And so, I think it's that individualized approach. Okay, one question. The
Okay.
Ozempic face, like when I can see people and like, that's an Ozempic face, or the semaglutide face or GLP-1 face.
Yeah.
Is there, yeah, let's talk.
They look like melting candles. I think that that's one. I think that a lot of people are utilizing their fat as their cushion and they don't have any muscle mass. So if you don't like when I go through periods where I'm not training as often, I start to lose muscle mass in my face just like everywhere else. So that's one piece. Is a lot of people are just deconditioned. Then they lose the weight and they look very gaunt. Number two, they're losing weight too quickly and they're going into a malnourished low calorie state. They're losing muscle, they're losing lean mass. Those studies where you hear the 40%, that's lean mass. Muscle's just part of that. That is
Right.
completely unnecessary. In fact, these are regenerative and healing and anti-inflammatory to muscle. They are almost anabolic like in the way that they actually impact the muscle. That
So
is
in
a
other words, anabolic like testosterone, for instance, or
yeah, they help actually perfuse the muscle with more blood flow and essentially more amino acids, and that helps muscle protein synthesis if you're eating protein. So prioritizing protein, prioritizing good high nutrient dense foods, and making sure what you eat counts. That's it, right? Like just don't and cranking the dose too high too fast and the weight loss being too aggressive. That's when people really start to look gaunt. I will say though that there is an impact, and I think this may be dose dependent. We don't have enough data, but there is some literature talking about the adipose derived stem cells and how GLP-1s do inhibit those. And those are your mesenchymal stem cells that turn into lots of other things that we need. So this also is the caution that I say when considering higher doses. I'm not a fan of the higher doses for that reason is I do not want to inhibit my adipose derived stem cells. And
right.
that's the fat on our face too, and many other things. I mean, my background's in stem cells that's
Yeah.
it clinically. So I'm like, oh, that's not great either. This is why I am again talking about this is why it's so important to do all the lifestyle pieces.
Well, and then the cycling you mentioned, having those breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like anything. I mean, I take hormone holidays once a month. I just want to make sure my receptors are sensitive and that I'm not just cranking. When patients don't take care of themselves, you have to just keep cranking up the hormone dose and the peptide dose. Those people require much more expensive interventions at much higher doses, and that's where we start to see things go rogue. I know with hormones for myself clinically, I don't love giving testosterone and estrogen to a woman who's really metabolically compromised and dealing with a lot of adipose tissue because those hormones go rogue and they don't tend to go down the pathways that I can predict as well as in her lean counterpart who's really fit. That's a much easier patient, right? That's like, oh, I just give you a little something, something, and you'll feel better. And we don't have to crank you up into oblivion. Same with this peptide, in my opinion.
Well, this is amazing. I mean, really, it's a lot of good information. I think number one, we're dispelling the fear, addressing the benefits, the metabolic benefits, cardiovascular, neurologic benefits. It's a potent, anti-inflammatory in
Hmm.
so many ways. So that degenerative joint issues. Has there been improvement or the opposite with bone health, osteoporosis? I've seen some conflicting research.
I think that might again be a dosing issue.
Dosage. I
You know,
agree.
if we're malnourishing them into, low protein state, low nutrient state, then they're going to have bone loss. And
Yeah.
especially if, a lot of bone health in the obese person is due to the gravity. So they have actually decent bones. And I mean, it's the same thing with weight loss, period, in an obese person. We'll see bone loss if they don't take up strength training because their actual weight that they were carrying around was keeping the bones stronger. So that's, I think, a big piece. And then the second piece is it's regenerative to bone. It actually has good, again, with blood perfusion and with um, even a balance in the osteoclast, osteoblast in some of the rodent studies I was looking at. So I did a whole podcast on just the musculoskeletal impacts of it. And now we've got a good study that just came out on knee osteoarthritis. Is it the weight loss or is it the anti-inflammatory? It works in the synovium and the cartilage. Who knows? I think it's both. I think it's all the pieces come. It's multi-pronged, and I think it's very cool because I haven't seen anything like that for knee osteoarthritis. The guy who headed the study said it was just he'd never seen anything like it. It just blown away at the impacts on knee OA, which is such a crippling and devastating disease. Talk about the root cause of metabolic dysfunction. It's when people's knees go, when their
Oh,
hips
yeah.
and their knees start
Hips
going,
and knees.
they start gaining weight in their midsection and boom, there go. And next thing you know, they're on blood pressure meds and statins and the whole thing. And they're like, oh, it was just older age. I'm like, no, it was when your knee got jacked up. And that's my world. Like that's where my whole
Yeah.
career was. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah. No, I can tell. I can tell. All right. Tell our audience. Well, first of all, again, thank you for dispelling fear, really giving a grounded and very fair view of this. And where can people find you?
Yes. So I am everywhere at Dr. Tina. It's DRTYNA. So I'm on YouTube, Instagram. You can go to my website. I have a free 4-part video series there that you'll find at the top called Ozempic Uncovered. It's for practitioners, it's for the general public. Lots more myths in there dispelled, and you'll come out of it with a much better education because these peptides aren't going anywhere. So the more we all understand about them, the more we can dissolve this, clickbait narrative that keeps going around. And from there, I have a deep dive course that is geared towards practitioners, health professionals of all kinds, but I've got it open to the general public because I'm guessing your listeners are like mine. They're smart people. They want to be
Mhm.
empowered. And inside, and I would love to have you come on as a guest expert in there because I want to bring in more of your insight. But inside, I've got hormones, gut health, all the things that I do in my clinical practice to address metabolic health with a big focus on GLP-1s and how to bring them into the whole picture, the toolkit.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, no, and those are excellent videos. It's an excellent resource. I've gone through it myself and it's powerful. So thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Dr. Tina. Are you okay? You guys check her out, Dr. Tina. So anywhere you on Instagram, her Instagram is amazing. YouTube, again, lots of education. And of course, her website. We'll put links below too to everything as well. So you'll have those. And ask your questions. Let us know. Okay, what questions you have? What comes up for you? Let me know. Definitely share this episode, do all the things, like it, subscribe to our channel, and definitely subscribe on YouTube. And I thank you for being here. I know with this issue, especially with using interventions that you may not be familiar with, it's important to be well educated. So there's a lot more information on this at Dr. Tina's website, on her YouTube, and on her um, social sites as well. So again, thank you all for being here. Till next time.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Girlfriend Doctor podcast. Check out all the links below for more.